It was natural when I got a circular building suddenly on my hands that it should be named Rotunda. I consciously go through almost all sorts of crazy ideas, and one of them, out of a dozen, one will be a good one, and the Rotunda happens to prove to be a good one. When I started, I was happy to do work for anybody to get some money in. I did work for other architects that they didn't want to do themselves. Did little concrete yards for schools or a couple of WCs and wash basins, all that sort of stuff. The city of Birmingham put an advert in for the first 3 sites on Birmingham's Ring Road. I won all 3 that were put out in one go and brought them together as a complex, integrated scheme. There's no apparent overall town planning scheme for anything further. The road just went on into space as an elevated road. It left open the possibility that right at the end of the Bristol Road there was nothing at the top of the hill, so I thought a wonderful spot for a vertical emphasis of some sort. It was an odd triangular site. It backed onto New Street and backed onto 2 or 3 different roads. And I thought, make a circular building of it, so it faces all ways. I've had people say, oh, you can't do it. The impossible just takes a bit longer. Lots of people say it's in the Bauhaus tradition. The fact though that I had a classical Beaux-Arts education, it was built into me to do something big and bold. And there's a column in it, and lots of columns in classical education, so I suppose the rounded and the round rotunda came into it, so it was natural when I got a circular building suddenly on my hands that it should be named Rotunda. The thing developed from there. I pulled in the same developer I'd worked for on the 3 competitions for the previous buildings. He was able to offer the city the highest ground rent of any site that had been for sale post-war. So he was very pleased with that. At a later stage, having given more thought to it, I thought, hey, let's extend this, make it a bit higher, make more of a feature of it. And my credibility was rising with the developer, and he rang up one day the chairman of Wimpers in London and said, hey, look, I've got Jim with me here. He thinks we could put another 5 or 6 stories on the Rotunda. Is that all right? And immediately I got the answer on the phone, yes. So that's how the Rotunda became from a low round building to a high building. And so things kept growing and growing and growing. The staff grew, and we moved rapidly from the little building, the offices in New Street. Then we moved to the Ringway Centre, and we operated from there for quite a while. Then we moved from there to the top of the Rotunda. My mother had a very bad birth with me, and that's why I've got deformed ankles. I think her family disowned her, and so there was nobody to help my mother when I was born, I believe. So that's why I got twisted legs, sort of thing. I was always ill when I was young because of the problems in my own home. My father left home when I was 10. My mother had no money, and we had no home ourselves. I was a loner. There's no way I could take football, there's hockey, cricket and that sort of thing. I was hopeless. I'm like I am because I had caliper on my right foot and deformed ankles from birth, and that is a driving power. People who have made it in power or made it to something, success of artists or whatever, I think they've all got inferiority complex. They're trying to justify it, they're trying to do better, they're trying to improve things, improve the world. So I decided that I'm going to go somewhere. In the war, after I came out of the army, I was a disabled chap. I came out of the army and I was in the Home Guard, and I was a lookout and observation officer, shall we say. I was located on top of the City of Birmingham Council House clock tower, and there was a shed on the top. And I was up there. Sometimes not a thing happened. It was cool and quiet and calm, but a blackened city, no lights anywhere, nowhere to be seen. The whole of Birmingham was jet black and just the moon and stars. And then suddenly all hell would break out and Birmingham would be under bombing. I was up there during that time when there were 50 fires raging all around me. There were parachute flares, there was stark coldness of the flares, and at the same time there were sticks of bombs coming round, and I saw a stick of bombs coming towards me on the tower. It was a horror to be up there, frightening. Now from the top of the Rotunda, the views today, one can have similar views, see the same lights and the same scenery in the quiet of peace.
Okay, there's this story. I really want to believe this. James Roberts is sitting, trying to think of a building that will fit between the Bull Ring and the bottom of New Street on a very odd-shaped site. So he's sketching, and he comes up with a squarish office block. He doesn't like it, and he goes in the paper bin. So he has another go, and this time he has it end on. And he still doesn't like it. And he goes in the bin. And then he looks at the bin and turns it upside down. The Rotunda.
Roy Bullock. I was foreman bricklayer on the Rotunda.
I travel to work on the local train, and of course I see the Rotunda every single day as I'm going into town. I look out the window to my left and I can see it, and I often smile quite often, and I have been known to say to people sitting next to me, my dad built that. You know, as if he built it by himself without anybody else's help at all, so.
Yeah, I was a bit keen on photography at that time. But, you used to be able to develop and print them. Well, it was just a job as far as I was concerned when I was working on it. I mean, I worked for Wimpy on numerous other places. I never had a good memory, even when I was young. Then, well, I don't remember a lot, really. It's a long while ago now.
It is.
It's because of my granddad building the Rotunda that all my family are living here in Birmingham today. I'm Rebecca Prosser, and my granddad is Dick Kenner, who single-handedly built the whole of the Rotunda, as he'd have us believe. Every Saturday morning, my granddad used to come over to visit us. But Jesus, Becky, I haven't seen you in 100,000 years. Wide-eyed with a huge grin, he'd open his arms and say, "Come here to me till I give you a love." Grandad always had a way of making everything a bit more fun. He would treat us grandkids to fantastic stories from his brave and treacherous life at sea. I was the captain of the Titanic once, you know. It only sank because I left the feckin' tap on. Then there were the stories from his childhood. We used to call him Huckleberry Grandad because of them. My granddad grew up in Dublin. He was born into a family of 6 boys and 5 girls. He lost his mother when he was about 6. From a very young age, he loved the movies. They were his escape. He said this was when he learned the importance of looking after his family, and he stood true to these values. He took my nanny, Peggy, to the cinema on their first dates. He told me he thought she was the loveliest girl he ever did see, and they stuck together from then on. He was still stealing coochie-moochie kisses from her when they were celebrating their 55th wedding anniversary. What a real old romantic. It was this duty to his family that brought him from Ireland to Birmingham to find work in construction, and he would eventually take up the position of head scaffolder on the Rotunda. Years later, when we were old enough to understand, he'd point out the big Pepsi can building in town and tell us how he built it up from the ground. He'd back up his claims at home by building complex models of the scaffolding out of bread and butter and big bottles of Worcester sauce. For us grandkids, this was just the kind of thing that made our granddad so fantastically marvellous. Not only could he make the best fish finger sandwich in town, but he'd only gone and made the best building in Birmingham while he was at it. And just as the Rotunda stands a central figure in the Birmingham skyline, our granddad was, and remains, a fundamental figure in our family. Someone to look up to, someone we'll always love, and most importantly, someone to be forever proud of.
So we've got the Rotunda there and the bullring there, New Street running upwards to Victoria Square at the top, and New Street Station is over there. So that's the 1960s Rotunda, but it wasn't Birmingham's first. There was an earlier one, which was an art gallery, which was up here. And it was a rotunda, it was a round building for exhibiting circular paintings. So the painting was wrapped around the inside of the building. You paid your sixpence, stood in the middle, and then you read the painting in the days before film, in the 1770s and 1780s and early 18th century. And they were taken around the country. The circular paintings had to go to a circular building, so they purpose-built them in various places, including this one on New Street.
I'm Barry Stanley. I've worked for James A. Roberts in the design and construction of the Rotunda building, and this is my wife Judith.
We met in 1961 when you were already working on the design of the Rotunda.
The Rotunda's still going and we're still together. So.
Absolutely.
These are some of the surviving drawings of the Rotunda. I remember when the Rotunda became a definite project. I walked into an impromptu meeting of some of the senior staff there, and they were looking at the model and talking about it and wondering what to call it. Eventually I said, well, surely it should be called the Rotunda because that's what it is. And I was glared at. Someone said, no, that's far too obvious. So, so maybe I christened it, and I always think that anyway. We were aware that on a rectangular building, rain would very often move upwards. So we were quite interested to know what was going to happen on a circular building. Well, we found out that the rain would go sideways, horizontally on the glass, until eventually you got to the lee side, where you could open the window on a rainy day without any problem at all. It was known that on occasions paper aeroplanes were thrown out of the windows. In fact, I can't think which days they didn't. It was my first big job.
Well, really, it was the biggest job that all of you had done.
Oh
wasn't it?
yes, absolutely. And we were all on a very steep learning curve, I think. I don't think any of us had worked on anything like it before. It was just always interesting and challenging and exciting. The Rotunda was unique then, and I don't think there'd be too many copies of it since.
It was cast on the wall using expanded polystyrene moulds, and it was a fairly innovative technique. In fact, I don't think it had been used in that way before. I was involved with making the relief sculpture in the Rotunda in 1962 or 3. I can't quite remember, it's a long time ago. There were altogether 5 people who helped me on the Rotunda. It was designed as an organic foil against the sort of rather mechanistic and polished surfaces of the banking hall. I literally designed it on the wall. And climbing up, there was scaffolding around the concrete core of the banking hall. I thought it looked like a bloody small gasometer. The round shape on that relief up there is an aluminium impeller from a jet engine. Square sections are cut out with a heated up garden hoe. Somewhere also an inscription which reads, "Honour to the arts, onos alit artis." There's also an inscription in the centre part of one of the round forms which reads, "John loves daffers," which was included. "I love daffers" carved on it is like carving your name on a tree. It's a bloody big tree, you know, a big round tree trunk, and that was the feeling I had, you know, and I did it. You carve it when you're young and you're in love, as one does, you know. 58 years we've done it. 58 years. Making a life model of a human being. Then you need to make it larger than the actual living person, because the living person moves, breathes, nods perhaps, or blinks. The whole ambience of a living human being is bigger than the actual physical size it has. Now, in that sense, I could feel the Rotunda as a big, round building in a sea of rectangulars and horizontals, you know, not a bit of roundness at all, has that same sort of contrast which justifies its existence. I've lived my life as a sculptor. Sculpture to me, in my tradition, is addressing yourself to posterity. In other words, you expect it to last at least so many 100 years. I feel that it is primary in the arts because they started to build later, so architecture is secondary. the one I've adopted in the last year or so. Non omnis moriar, which is, broadly speaking, I shall not altogether die. And I'm making the best of what is left.
I started work there in the old Lloyd's Bank, and I worked in there until 64, then when we moved over into the Rotunda. Yeah, there we were, carrying these typewriters and counting machines over and up the escalator, you know, and putting them into the office. We were all excited because we'd watched it grow and grow, and that we were going to be the first ones to go in there and work there was going to be wonderful. We made quite a lot of friends on the building site because we were only young girls then. And then when we went over to the Rotunda, we had the cash point, which to me I think was the first type of cash point in the country. It's got to be, because that was the first one that went out onto the street. Never seen one before. No, I think that was how cash point started with that. You sat downstairs in a little room that was like a box with two windows in front of you, and you had a microphone there in front of you, and if they wanted to change a cheque you'd put it into a sort of metal slot thing at the bottom, pull a handle that brought it into you, and you would talk to these people on a microphone out into the street. A lot of the time, because it was new, you'd forget to turn the microphone off, so you'd be talking to whoever was working with you and people would be going, what's that, you know, and wondering where it was coming from. And obviously everybody could hear you that was walking up New Street, you know, it was really funny. We used to say, oh, he's a bit of all right over there, isn't he? And he'd turn around, oh, turn the microphone off quick.
My name is Leslie McHugh. I started at Rotunda in 1968, and I was there till I retired in 1992. So I was there 24 years. My job there was maintenance engineer for the building. I mean, I did a lot of things. I mean, I collected stamps as well, you know. I've been collecting stamps for years, you know, over the years, yeah. And I've got a nice collection, yeah. What I used to do is, when offices got rid of their rubbish, if there was any envelopes, you know, with stamps on, I'd take them out and collect them. It was fantastic, you know, the amount of mail that came into the Rotunda. It came in sacks-alls, you know. There were 14 airline companies in the building, and they was very helpful, you know, helping me to collect all the stamps from all over the world. I had a workshop on the 9th floor, an empty office, which was not let. And in my lunch hour, I used to build models. I built a fort, and I built a model of the First World War in the trenches. And this is a model of Rawstrift. I made this 22 years ago when I worked at the Rotunda, because it was associated with the Birmingham recruiting of troops. That's how I made the model. Nobody knew when I was working on the 9th floor that I was making models. Oh wow.
Okay, the Rotunda family tree looks like this. During 1940, there was heavy bomb damage in the middle of Birmingham, particularly the Bullring area. But there were ambitious plans already underfoot to redevelop, redesign the whole of central Birmingham. Put the two together and you've got a massive scheme for redevelopment. And redevelopment in the 1950s and 60s meant roads, particularly roads. After all, Birmingham's car city, it made all the cars, so why shouldn't it accommodate them? And roads meant, particularly from the 1930s, 40s onwards, ring roads in lots of places, but Birmingham in particular. So a large ring road that shuts in the city centre, and all the traffic that doesn't need to go into the middle could go round it. An urban motorway, they called it. And it's that ring road that sits right next to the Rotunda and the Bullring. It shoved the open market downwards, and it created a whole new spectacular space around the Rotunda.
I suppose it's like anybody with a house that you've lived in for some time, or you enjoyed having. You don't normally have the chance to go back and knock on the door and say, can I have a look around your house? It's nice to think you can go back to the Rotunda.
Because it did feel special. It was a privilege to live there. And that's what I feel that we're going to lose our claim to fame as we lived on the Rotunda. And now loads of people are going to live there, aren't they? You became famous for the fact that you lived on the Rotunda, I suppose.
Yeah.
Very true. You had an identity.
Our father was the caretaker
in 1968.
And we lived on the 20th floor.
Yeah, there was never a restaurant at the top of the Rotunda, but there was a bar. My dad had a bar in the living room.
And we did do the odd thing like play ball when we shouldn't, and the ball would go over the top, and then we'd look to see where it had landed and hope it didn't kill anybody on the way down.
Yeah. Right, because the town was deserted, on a Sunday it became our playground. We'd race each other up to the top in the lifts. We'd throw things over the roof. Sometimes they'd be the pebbles, to see if anybody would notice and things like that.
Oh yeah, so we were typical
we weren't angels. We were close enough to heaven, but we weren't angels. I was in the building and the phone rang, and there was this voice on the other end of the phone, and it said, "This is not a hoax. There's a pear-shaped bomb being planted on the building, and it's going to go off at 4:45." Obviously, I was a bit scared, but I ran down to my dad. "Don't worry about it," he said. "Have a look round and let me know if you find anything." So, "Well, what shall I do?" And he said, "Well, you're all right. You can just stay up there." I said, "But what happens if it goes off?" He said, "Well, don't worry, you'll be the first one up there. You can wave us all in." And I was sat there till 6 o'clock. Mum came in and she said, "What are you doing sitting there like that?" With everything that's been going on, Dad had just totally forgot about me. Seeing it being dismantled has been quite difficult for me personally, to watch them changing it, because in my mind it's always as it was when we lived there, and that was our home. There was no sound whatsoever. And so you imagine in the city that's hustling and bustling around, and you're up there and it's like you're the only person that exists in the world. And it's an absolutely fantastic feeling.
We will always be the first residents of the Rotunda.
I'm Bob Woman, and I'm the senior presenter of ITV Central here in Birmingham. And I was the first television reporter on the scene of the Birmingham pub bombings on that night of November the 21st, 1974. Well, it was a Thursday evening and we'd finished the programme and we're packed into the bar of the old ATV studios just on Paradise Circus there, and we heard this curious noise. We heard this sort of thud, and somebody said, "What was that?" I said, "Don't know." Well, none of us had ever heard a bomb go off before, so we didn't immediately recognise the sound of a bomb, but it was a distinct sound. And then a couple of minutes later, another sound, similar sort of sound, another great boof. Somebody said, "That's a bomb, it must be a bomb." Well, we rustled a crew together as fast as we could and raced off on foot down New Street to the Rotunda. And the scene there was just quite extraordinary. The whole of the Mulberry Bush public house, which was in the basement of the Rotunda, had just been blown away. And there was the most extraordinary scene of devastation. It became clear what had happened. First of all, a bomb had gone off in the Mulberry Bush public house. That was right in the base of the Rotunda. And 10 people were killed outright there. And then the second bomb had gone off in the tavern in the town. And there was this extraordinary scene of confusion, dust, and the sound of alarms. Every alarm in town was going off and continued to go. Bells just ringing away. And then huge numbers of people who gathered. The police trying to keep them back. Fire engines, ambulances that could get through, taxis loading terribly injured people into their cabs and racing off to the accident hospital and the general hospital. My job, obviously, was to try and get the facts. It's very difficult to get facts in the confusion. And there wasn't really time to fully take in what had happened. That came later. You never forget a scene like that. The dust, the confusion, the sound, the sheer misery of horribly injured people. You never forget that. 10 people lost their lives in the Mulberry Bush that night, and another 11 people in the tavern in the town, and many, many more people were injured. Some 200 people were injured. But that scene there, the Mulberry Bush, as I say, completely blown out into the street, and the tower above the Mulberry Bush, standing there solid. Whether it was the intention of the bombers to actually try and bring down the Rotunda or simply to cause as much death and injury as possible, well, we'll never know. But throughout it, the Rotunda stood sound and solid. There was damage, obviously, to windows, and as I say, the Mulberry Bush itself was totally devastated. But that iconic building remained as sound and as solid as ever.
21st of November 1974, I was a fireman driving a fire engine at Highgate Fire Station for the night. Now, I did work on the construction of the Rotunda as a scaffolder, and my first thoughts when I heard the bomb had exploded in the Rotunda was, oh my God, the bloody building will fall down. So I decided I'd drive against the traffic down Corporation Street, into New Street, and try and get to the Rotunda that way. Dark night, the traffic was pouring out of the city up Corporation Street. As I turned into New Street, the tavern in the town exploded in front of us. It knocked everybody flat to the floor, stunned everybody in the street. There's a backdrop of tremendous noise, glass, people screaming, and it was sort of chaos when we pulled up at the scene, you know. Central Control came back to me and said, "Can you confirm the number of ambulances, please?" And I says, "Yes, 4040. And then the radio system went dead. I realised, because I'd been driving the black cabs and knew they got a great radio system, I knew the city was gridlocked. I knew there'd be cabs probably locked inside the city who could assist. I shouted, "Get on the radio, mate. See if you can get any cabs around here, would you?" And all the cabs made the way past the Rotunda, past all the ambulances that were stacked by the Rotunda. We loaded every taxi up with at least 5 people, with the carers and the walking wounded, sent them to the general hospital and the accident hospital. In all fairness, you could have walked virtually 3/4 around the Rotunda before you realised there was ever any incident there. The crowd that night had been very anti-Irish, across the road shouting anti-Irish slogans. In the coming nights, we actually attended fires at the Irish community centres, Irish houses that had been set alight, and the atmosphere was quite appalling, really, for us at all, you know. And yeah, it was a very, very dark day for Birmingham that night. It was appalling.
The reason that I used to go into the Mulberry Bush in the Rotunda was because I used to meet my fiancé in town. We lived in different parts of Birmingham. We used to meet friends in there, but that particular night we didn't go straight over to our friends. They were a little bit further over, and the one chap that we were very close to was actually killed. Ian went back in after he got me into an ambulance. He went back in to see if he could find him, but he said that the mountain of rubble was basically where it must have gone off, because the mountain of rubble, he said there was just no chance of finding him. He always says he remembers the noise, but I don't remember the noise. I just remember feeling as if the lights had sort of flashed off. And then I had the sensation of floating through the air, and it was as if someone was pulling my tights off me, and I just felt this bare sensation on my legs. I must have passed out for a few seconds, but then I remember sort of being landed on the floor and Ian calling to me. Then I hit the ground near the bar, and I knew straight away, I think because there'd been a couple of times they'd sort of planted bombs at the bottom of the Rotunda, we knew straight away what it was, what had happened to us. And all I could hear then was like screaming, people screaming and not knowing where they were. The smell of the burning flesh of people. Ian started to move some rubble off my leg to try and carry me out, and then as he started to lift me, a security man that worked in another part of the Rotunda actually came and helped him get me outside. That's when I realised, my stomach was quite badly injured. At first I thought it was only my leg. And they lay me on the wall just outside by New Street Station. But the noise that sticks in my mind is the ambulances coming, and just feeling they were never going to reach us. I remember sort of being taken to the hospital and sort of moaning that to stop bumping me because I was in so much pain. Not realising, I don't think then, just how bad I was. I just knew it was quite bad. For the next few days I don't remember much at all about that, because I was in intensive care for 5 days. I was quite physically injured, and being from an Irish Catholic background, I was given the last rites on the night that it happened. I was just 21 then, so they weren't sure if I was going to make it through the night. And I remember my dad coming in and seeing me and saying that he'd been to have a look at the Rotunda and how horrendous it was, and he didn't know how anyone had got out alive at all. It was so bad in there. And I've got some quite bad physical scarring that I've lived with over the years. I've still tried not to ever be bitter about what happened, because I think that would only harm me. And my father was Irish, so I've got quite a curiosity about it all anyway, about the Northern Ireland situation anyway. And I suppose I've just always tried to understand and what made people go to those lengths for their cause. We campaigned and campaigned to get some sort of memorial stone put, and eventually in the 21 years after, and when they got a stone with all the names put on of the people that were killed, it took 21 years for Birmingham to acknowledge that and put that there.
My name's Paddy Joe Hill, and I'm one of the men more commonly known as the Birmingham Six. I was wrongly convicted of the Birmingham pub bombings in 1974. At the time I was resident in Birmingham. My older brother was in the army, like, from way back. I'm the second eldest, but my older brother, my father came out of the British Army in 1959. He'd been in the British Army for 30 odd years since he was a boy. I'd been living in Birmingham up to then, for nearly 15 years. Before the Birmingham pub bombings happened, it was my home. And I was very proud to live there. Birmingham to me was just like being at home in Ireland. Like, I was well known to the cops in Birmingham. I had a previous record, you know, mainly for violence and what have you, stabbings, slicings, unlawful wounding with the intent to commit. I've had a lot in Birmingham when I was a kid, but I'd packed all the gang stuff up by this time, you know. I was married, had 6 kids. I wasn't interested, you know, and then suddenly this happens to you. On the night it happened, I first heard about the bombings when I was on the boat at Hysham. We were going home to see a friend of ours and some friends at home. We were also going to attend the funeral of an IRA man, James McDade, who had blown himself up a couple of weeks prior. He come from the same small district as me in Belfast, the Ardoyne. And his older brother was my best mate when I was at home. And that was the reason, like, for us going home to pay our respects, you know, to the family. People think that we were arrested. I've never been arrested for the Birmingham pub bombings. In fact, even though I spent nearly 17 years of my life in prison, I have never, ever in my life been questioned about the Birmingham pub bombings. The police told us right from the start that they knew that we hadn't done it, but they said they didn't care. And we were charged with 68 bombings. He went on to tell me that we were going to go to jail for it, and that the only thing to be decided was whether we were going to get a 30-year minimum recommendation or whether we were going to get natural life. I've often asked IRA men in jail why they suddenly turned from giving plenty of warning to no warnings at all. As I said, there was always plenty of warning prior to them going off, and no one was ever killed or injured. So until then, like, nobody took any notice of it. Of all the bombings that had been set off in England, I think there may have been anywhere up to near 100 of them at that time. There had been so many bombings in Birmingham around the Rotunda. The Rotunda was bombed a number of times in the past, because at that time the IRA had been conducting a campaign for about nearly 2 years. Like the Rotunda itself, I remember when it was first built way back in the 60s, when they started revamping the whole of the bullring then. In fact, I worked in the painting and decorating for a few firms when it was being done. And yeah, I remember it being built all right. But the Rotunda itself was a landmark, if you could see it from what miles around in Birmingham. And prior to the Birmingham pub bombings, on a number of occasions, bombs had been exploded around the Rotunda. And when it happened, usual thing, the police would clear the area and people would be out in New Street and what have you, stamping up the road from it. And of course, when the bomb went off, everybody used to cheer. Nobody took any notice of it. It was like people sort of having to dig at authority. And of course, the good thing about it, if there is such a good thing, was the simple fact that no one was killed or injured in those bombings, because at that time plenty of warning was given. But unfortunately, when the Birmingham pub bombings happened, there was practically no warning whatsoever. But the Rotunda itself had been blown up on I don't know how many occasions in the past, and everybody treated it as a joke. In fact, if people in Birmingham at the time were to be honest, I would say that the vast majority of young people in Birmingham were delighted. They treated it as a joke. And simply because, as I said, that no one was killed or injured in then. But of course, the Birmingham pub bombings changed all that. It was only after the bombings actually happened that I found out that a friend of my mother's, who lived just down the road from my mother in Errington, an Irish Dublin family, one of her sons was actually killed in the bombing. And of course I found out years later when I was in jail, I met an old friend of mine, Audrey, and it was only through talking to him in the segregation block in Gartree prison that I learned that his young brother was one of the people that was actually killed in the bombings. Like after it happened, my kids ended up in a home. And I had a row with, I remember when I first came out, I was only out about 18 months, and I was at my daughter's house, and my daughter came in and She just looked at me and she just went berserk. She was screaming hysterically, crying her eyes out, and she says to me, "Dad, I don't have many memories of you before you went away, but I've got a hell of a lot of memories after you went away. I remember being battered, thrown in the bath of cold water and thrown into bed, starving, cold and wet in the home, and all because you were supposed to be the Birmingham pub bomber and I was your daughter." She says, "I've waited nearly 17 years for you to come home. And you've been out a year now, and I've realised that I am never ever going to get you back because you don't belong here." I said, "I'll tell you why. Because you see in here, I feel something for the people in prison. See in here for you, I don't feel nothing. And that's the way it is even today. They're like strangers to me. And that's the only way I can handle it, you know. I just don't know what it is. I just feel dead inside for people. Prison kills you a little bit at a time, every day. We would never admit to when we're in prison because we don't realise it. We're damaged. And the sad thing is that we don't realise how badly damaged we are. You can't explain in words, you know. One minute you're sitting there and you're happy. There's nothing wrong with you. And a couple of minutes later you'll find yourself laying on the floor crying like a child. And you don't even know what you're crying for. You don't feel a part of anything out here. Most people don't want help, even though they need help. But they don't want help when they first come out because they think they can handle it. When I left Gartree Prison for my 1991 appeal, I promised others that I would dedicate the first year of my life to highlighting the cases. And of course, little did I realise that 17 years later, I'm still doing it. I'm still helping people. And of course, I went on to form an organisation which is the Miscarriage of Justice organisation. We call it Mojo for short. When I go to sleep at night, I don't lose any sleep over the people who died or were injured in Birmingham. I go to bed every night with a clean conscience because I know I never done anything. I know what it's like to lie in a prison cell being wrongly convicted. It's only since I come out and helping other people that it's given me an actual perspective of what actually happens to the families of people who are wrongly convicted. And that is something that should happen to no family. But only through that have I got a better understanding of what my own family went through. I have 3 daughters who still live in Birmingham and my ex-wife still lives there. You know, but it devastated my family. But I hardly ever see them. They're like strangers to me. Like, even though I go back to Birmingham and what have you, I get very mixed emotions. Very mixed emotions. Yeah, it brings it back, but I also remember, like, before the Birmingham pub bombings, I think, to be quite honest to say, I was very, very happy in Birmingham before this happened. And if this hadn't have happened to me, I'd probably still be living in Birmingham today. You know, it's a great city.
So we've got a kind of think tank really in those post-war years in Birmingham. Herbert Mansoni is the city engineer. There wasn't a city architect at the time, and it's significant that it's an engineer that's planning, that has the visions of how Birmingham's to look. Every city has to have visionaries from time to time. Trouble is they can be a menace, because visions don't often engage with reality sometimes. I did a lecture, well, I've done it a couple of times, called Herbert Mansoni, A Warning from History, which, yeah, because, yes, what he did, the damage he did, God, was awful, really. And he wanted to create, as it were, a machine that was a 20th century city. So his interest was in its smooth running, its passage of cars, people around it. He saw it in those kind of engineering terms. Mansoni's kind of idea was everything should be big, so large plans, nothing small, and build for a generation, not for longer than that, because times change and you need to rethink in 25 years' time. Then there's a group of architects like Maiden, who did the Central Library, and James Roberts, who designed the Rotunda. And then a wider circle of planners preparing this blueprint of a 20th, 21st century city with a ring road, an enclosed centre. And the demolition and change in Birmingham at that time was huge. Birmingham, to be honest, has always gone through major upheavals from Victorian times onwards, but that was a really big one. And a lot of those buildings have gone since. We don't like them anymore, but the Rotunda is one that survives from that enormous rebuilding scheme.
I've always taken an interest in buildings in Birmingham, particularly towards their preservation, not just Victorian buildings but also 1960s buildings. And 17 years ago I had the privilege of going to a public inquiry to object to the Bullring redevelopment on various aspects. One of the main planks of my objection was to do with the Rotunda, the possible demolition of it. They produced a response to my objection, which is a short document. There are a few bullet points in here that really sum up the inquiry as far as I'm concerned to my objections. I've never been to a public inquiry before, so I didn't really know what I was letting myself in for. And really, I must admit, when I got there on the day, it was slightly nerve-wracking, because it was almost like a courtroom. You know, you had barristers cross-examining you, and you had like the judge, and then they called up Les Sparks, who was Director of Development, for me to cross-examine, which I thought was quite amusing, really, you know, little me against the might of the council. And basically, on the demolition of the Rotunda, there are 3 basic paragraphs, and they are quite amusing, really. Section 3, demolition of the Rotunda, item 3.1. The City Council and Letts, who were the developers at the time, accept that the Rotunda is a landmark in Birmingham in the sense that it helps orientation in the city. However, it is not of any special architectural significance, being a fairly typical 1960s style building. Any interest that it has comes from the fact that it is round. It is not, as contended by Mr. Trove, perhaps the only 1960s building that contributes to the town's character. In fact, it is an undistinguished building and does not merit preservation, which is their response in 1991. I also suggested that we should have it listed, and they're saying in section 3.2, Mr. Trove suggests that the building is suitable for listing. In the past few years, schemes involving its demolition have been put forward without anybody suggesting it should be listed. It is a building of its time, but clearly not a good building of its time. Yeah, well, in my cross-examine of that, I actually said to Les Sparks, you know, I considered his item 3.1 as arrogant and dismissive of the Rotunda. To describe it as a fairly typical 1960s building seems odd, and I suggested that the building is possibly unique, certainly to the way it contributes to the city skyline. And do you know of any other similar building elsewhere that does this in the way that the Rotunda does? And I also then referred to the council's own study, how to make buildings more memorable. One of the things you need to give them rotunda shapes, which is quite amusing. And that was done by a guy called Francis Tybalt, who I felt had a real regard for the Rotunda. So there's an example of where they were coming from at the time. It was, I say, quite nerve-wracking, but I think I did okay. I think I held my own, and obviously the Rotunda got listed, and the rest is history. You know. Well, yeah, it's quite funny because my background is engineering, good old mechanical engineering. And maybe, perhaps I should have gone into architecture, but who knows, maybe I wouldn't have loved buildings so much if I did. I mean, I like buildings, you know, I'm a very visual person. You know, the built environment is so important. You know, if that's a good quality built environment, you know, life can be not worth living, you know. In my early teens, I used to travel into town on a regular basis on the 50 bus. and I always used to notice the buildings either side of the street. There's also an awful lot of detail to see on buses on the upper deck, and I noticed a lot of these buildings were disappearing, and I don't know, I just suddenly got this feeling about them and thought, well, look, this is not right. And you only tend to notice things when they disappear, and that's the sad thing about it. The destruction made me feel the way I did about the preservation. And there's so many good buildings been lost in Birmingham over the last 50 years, and now, you know, you look back, you realise how many mistakes were made. It's so important for everybody that we keep a lot of the good building. Well, it's round, but, you know, it's obviously a unique building. I don't know of any other building like that, certainly in England. And it has stood the test of time. It still looks quite good. And it is an icon. I mean, you used to see it on tea towels and teapot stands and stuff like that. And it's that thing, you know, you look at it, it's such a huggable building. It's like a tree, you know, you can go up and hug it, you know, it's of a human scale. Sort of like a tree, you know, that's the feeling I have about it. Something special about it, you know, it's sort of a bit of a gem. Something, you know, I don't know, I mean, that's just a word.
One of the greatest things about 20th century society casework, which is what I do, is that you can go and find the architect. You know, I mean, these guys are still alive. And that's wonderful. You know, I mean, you're not always going to like what they've got to say, you know, often about their own buildings. But at least you've got their opinion. It's no surprise that the Society finds itself a bit London-centric. We're based in London, and I think we care deeply as an organisation about the heritage of the recent architecture of Birmingham, because so much of it is so good. Modern architecture in London does seem to be a bit more appreciated. If the Rotunda had been in London, it might have been recognised earlier and not had any threats to it. We're still fighting against many misconceptions and preconceived ideas about what modern architecture or what modernism really meant to Britain. I mean, Birmingham's really got something with the Rotunda. There's not really anything like it anywhere else in the country. And it sort of exemplified the move towards similar shapes that were being found in art and applied art at that time. That can't be underestimated when you're looking at a building's importance. In a local context, the community of Birmingham know the Rotunda. Everybody has certain memories of it. Even on a national level, it's quite an idiosyncratic and an interesting building. In 1999, the 20th Century Society applied to English Heritage for the building to be listed, and were successful in doing that. The prime reason that it was listed was this incredible skin that the building had. We thought that the changes, both to the glazing and the loss of the mosaic bands which ran round the outside of the building, was a shame, and we objected strongly to those changes. If buildings were listed for how they appeared on the drawing board 10 years previous, then we'd have a whole entirely different set of values. I think it's undoubtedly an icon. I mean, it's an iconic building for the way it looks, for its position, you know, on an elevated bit of land in the middle of Birmingham. It's iconic for the you know, how it lives in the memories of people in Birmingham, and how everybody seems to know it or have a story to tell about it. It's one of those things that seems to be, it's one of those buildings that just seems to be inset in the cultural memory of the city, and long may it stay there.
I'm John Bounds. I run Birmingham It's Not Shit, the website. It tries to improve the image of Birmingham in a different way from the official bodies, so it tries to shout a little bit. One of the first things, in fact the first thing we did for the website Birmingham It's Not Shit was the dancing rotunda. I think the rotunda's become an icon and a magical thing almost because it's not a building you use, or not a building most people use anyway. You don't go inside it. It's magical. It's there. It could be a sculpture almost. It's almost egalitarian because it's so uniform, and it's a natural Brummie building. You can see that it almost grew from the floor where it is. It's a perfect thing to show that Birmingham is still Birmingham and not just some generic city that you can plonk buildings in. It's a meeting point, it's a focal point for the city. It's almost, in a kind of way, the epicentre of Birmingham. Everything else has to radiate around from it because it's circular. Things are a distance from the rotunda, almost the sort of spiritual home of Birmingham now. The council and other people have done a nice job in regenerating parts of the city, but you couldn't knock the rotunda down, you couldn't replace the rotunda. None of these new buildings or things are going to replace the rotunda in the sense of being an icon for Brummie, certainly. You can't build an iconic building. You can draw one on paper, you can make it shocking, but an iconic building comes from how people see it. It's an icon for the city because of what it is. You can't impose that sort of thing on a town. It can sit almost alone as a work of art, a painting. Something in the background to be looked at but not touched too much.
The Rotunda in Birmingham isn't the only round building in the world, and in fact round buildings became all the rage in the 1960s, early 70s. Round was the popular shape for design. I've seen a couple of them. There's one in Brașov in Romania. There's one in Poznan, which is Poland's second city, and there's one, which I haven't seen, that's in Nairobi in Kenya. So what those two buildings in Brașov in Romania and Poznan in Poland really highlight is how much the influence of Eastern European architecture was on Britain in the 1960s and 70s. Neither of those look as impressive as the Birmingham Rotunda, and I think the reason is the slope on New Street. New Street does slope down towards the River Ray, and the Rotunda sits right on the top of that slope. It sits about 200 feet above the ground level there, and that makes it look taller than it would do otherwise.
My name's Clive Dutton, and I'm really proud to be the Director of Planning and Regeneration for the City of Birmingham. I think I've got the best job of its kind in the country. Some people say, how's the Rotunda going to fit in with the future dynamic changes in the city? And I say no, it's really how everything else fits in with the Rotunda, because it's that important really as a beacon and a symbol in terms of the skyline of the City of Birmingham. So it really is massively important. Some things change in terms of the skyline and the city, but the Rotunda will always be there, and that is so important. And how we plan the city, these aspects of distinctiveness and identity are the things that everybody finds really reassuring, and the Rotunda is really special in that context. What we're doing now, which has never been done before, is to create the new master plan for the city. So a very ambitious piece of work. It really has got to reflect the distinctiveness of Birmingham. It is actually respecting and protecting those aspects of the city's rich heritage. Whether or not that it's heritage going back, you know, in some aspects hundreds of years, or the heritage of the 1960s as well. And the Rotunda is a very, very special part of that. And like looking after one of our own, which is what the Rotunda is, we've always got to look at the setting of the Rotunda and make sure it's not crowded out, and making sure it's got a little bit of room to breathe there and to continue to be appreciated. Because if you're from Birmingham, and it's strange to say this about a building, but it's like a really good friend. There's an aspect of being familiar with something. You see the skyline of Birmingham at night, and you see the Rotunda, and you know you're home.
Welcome to the Lord Mayor's Parlour in Birmingham. My name's Randall Brew, I'm Lord Mayor of Birmingham, and this is my wife Sandra Brew, the Lady Mayoress. We were both born in Birmingham, educated in Birmingham, worked in Birmingham all our lives, and will be carried out of Birmingham in our boxes when we eventually go. Rotunda's been part of the Birmingham life for over 50 years, part of Birmingham's landscape, and whenever people talk about Birmingham, nationally or internationally, the Rotunda quite often comes into the conversation. So it's very much an icon of Birmingham. We have a collection of buildings in Birmingham that are becoming very famous throughout the nation and across the world. The Rotunda was one of the first ones. Love it or hate it, it's here to stay, and people keep referring to it and linking it with Birmingham, and there's no such thing as bad publicity. I think it is an icon. I think part of it is a message of defiance. Because if you go back again to the pub bombings, I'm sorry to go back, but I think it brought together Birmingham people at their best in the face of the tragedy. People just got together and helped each other and got on with life. And the Rotunda was very much part of the feature of that.
No, it's a wonderful building. It really is. Yeah. People just see it as being the Rotunda, but you try and take it away. Cool. It's just very much part of Birmingham. I had an extraordinary sensation when I went for an interview for a job in one of the offices in the Rotunda, lost my way and literally walked 2 laps, just going round and round and round. It was most peculiar. Panic was setting in when someone came to my rescue. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful building. What can you add to it, really?
Is it perfect then?
No, it's a wonderful building. It really is. Yeah.
This is Rotunda. They come from Birmingham. It's old school punk oi music in a way. This is called New from Birmingham.
We was all in the foundry. We all came up with the name at the same time when he said it.
The Rotunda. Yeah, we wanted the band to be about Birmingham, and we're all Brummies. And what one thing can we think of? What unifies everything together? And we all thought of the name Rotunda at the same time. You know, the landmark, Birmingham. First thing you see when you come to Brum, the Rotunda. It's a great building, and we all love it. We're proud to be Brummies, and we're proud to be from Birmingham. So we thought the name Rotunda would show our identity and let people know that we're from Birmingham.
It's like the ugly building that everyone had to like. You know.
No, it's not ugly, is it?
everybody drinks.
I lived in Sparkbrook, Selly Oak and various other parts of Birmingham, and never been tempted to move from Birmingham. Where else would you go? Centre of the world, hubcap of the nation. Ah, the Rotunda. Well, I remember it being built, actually. When I was a little lad, there were bomb buildings all over the place, but then there was a regeneration of Birmingham during my early teens, and the Rotunda was part of that. And it's become part of our skyline, hasn't it? Amazing, like the Sydney Harbour Bridge or the San Francisco Bay Bridge or the CN Tower or all sorts of wonderful things. The Tower of London, I suppose. It's part of us. And I remember when they were going to pull it down, what a tragedy. Because it has deep meaning for us. Of course, it was bombed by the IRA, very, very sadly, in the 1970s, as we all know. A friend I went to school with was actually killed in that bombing, so probably has a little bit more meaning for me than for many other people. And at a time when they were talking of turning it into flats, I actually went up to the very top of the Rotunda, something I'd never done before, and the views over Birmingham, absolutely spectacular. Makes you realise what a magnificent city we live in. I wandered around with my prawn vol au vent and my glass of cheap wine, looking out of every window, and I sort of circled it once and thought, this is fantastic, and I shall circle it again, and I circled it again, and nobody could find me because I kept going around in circles at the top of the Rotunda. And I did Latin at school, and when we started doing Latin, our Latin master gave all of us a name, and there was one little fat kid at school, and he was known as Rotundus for the whole of the first 2 years of school. Now, obviously, in the current climate, the way people are now, sticks and stones and things, he'd be in therapy and claiming thousands of pounds of compensation for what the Latin teacher did to him, but it at least cemented the Rotunda in our minds, and that was actually before it was built. They named it after him.
Hello, I'm Malcolm Stent. I'm a comedian. I'm also a writer. I'm a folk singer. That's where I started off, actually, in the folk clubs in Birmingham. But that's the path that I chose to follow when I didn't get the job at the Rotunda. And when I had a proper job, I was a draftsman in a civil engineering, structural engineering office. I went for an interview there the one day. I didn't get the job, which caused me to follow the path that I'm following now. And I'm a Brummie born and bred. I'm fiercely proud of being a Brummie. And the centre, of course, of any city is its marketplace. Anyway, there you are. You've got the bull ring there. That changed in the 60s when the council decided that all the people should go underground and that the traffic should be all on the top and go around the top of the bull ring. And of course, what was built there to head it all up, this circular building, the Rotunda. Now that was an innovation because there was no other circular buildings except lighthouses in the world, and Birmingham had a circular building. It wasn't a lighthouse, it could have been for all the stuff coming up the canals, but it wasn't. But there we are, the Rotunda, and it stood at the head of that bull ring. That bull ring sadly went, and we've got a new bull ring now, but the Rotunda is still there. This magical cylindrical building which became an icon. 2 or 3 years back, I was invited to open the new bull ring. I was met by the chief executive of the development company, the people who just developed the bull ring. And he said to me, he said, have we done a good job for you or what? And I said, well, yeah, standing here by the Rotunda and looking down the bull ring, great to see St Martin's Church looking so good, and of course the Rotunda. I said, but the only problem is, I said, you look over to the left there and somebody's dumped a pile of hubcaps. And this bloke looked at me and he said, where? And I said, there. And he said, those aren't hubcaps, that's Selfridges. They wouldn't come to Birmingham if they couldn't have that design. I said, well, did you not think it might have been better if they hadn't have come then? And he said, That building, he said, will become an icon of the city of Birmingham. So I said, yeah, we used to have the piss taken out of us. There are two iconic buildings in the Bullring. There's the Rotunda and St Martin's Church. Now, a fact that not many people know about the Rotunda is that the Rotunda was at one time the meeting place for blind dates. Blind dates in the city of Birmingham. And any Saturday night, there'd be upwards of 700 people all standing outside the Rotunda, all sort of looking at each other and going... But that was the meeting place for blind dates. And of course, it was a short walk then, just along New Street, to go into the Odeon Cinema, or to any of the flesh pots of Birmingham. One of those flesh pots was right underneath the Rotunda. It was the mulberry bush. I'm fiercely proud of my Birmingham heritage. Anything of beauty or of value that could be knocked or bashed out of a piece of metal was made here. And the Rotunda is there as a sign that we're still here and we're still fighting and we're still breathing.
That just about wraps it up this afternoon. Thanks for your contribution. I've enjoyed it. Hope you have too. Back tomorrow, same time, same place. Broadcasting from the centre of Birmingham, just for Brummies. I'm Tom Ross. Good evening. See you soon. Over the years, Birmingham has changed so dramatically. It's now unrecognisable from the 60s. And yet, the one thing that hasn't and stands proud is the Rotunda. While all the developments happening around it, that building still stands there, a symbol of Birmingham's great heritage. Certainly the first thing that I remember is the 60s. And me and all my mates going into town to see this circular building. We never heard of one. A circular building. Beggars belief, how did they do it? It was at the time when they were putting the pedestrians underground and the cars above ground, which was Birmingham's way of ruining the whole fantastic city centre. And this building that's become iconic, the Rotunda, everybody hated it originally and grew to love it. We Brummies are very proud of our city as well, and this is a building that we've become equally proud of. We didn't like it at first, but now we love it, and it's a proud symbol of what this city is about. We don't get much credit, you know, anywhere, but this is a wonderful city, great architecture, great people, lovely, warm people. And that building, you know, they tried to damage it in '74 with the IRA bombs, and it still stands there, proud and erect like our city, you know, symbolising what we're about, proud people, working class, honest, proud people. And I think that building stands there and almost says it, doesn't it? This is Birmingham.
I'm really an immigrant to Birmingham because I came here from the north of England on the 5th of April 1948 to begin operating package tours. I'm the founder of the package tour industry in this country. I felt that if you lived in Birmingham, you'd have to get out of the place at least once a year. In 1968, that's 4 years after the Rotunda was built, I took over Aston Villa Football Club. But my memories of Rotunda go back to the day it was built. I was watching it being built from my third floor office in Cannon Street, and it became the landmark for the city of Birmingham. Wonderful building, and I used to go there for parties, particularly on the 21st floor, because there was a wonderful view of the city from the 21st floor. And not that I didn't go to other parties, and well, when I say parties, they weren't all parties, they were business meetings. I would say 10 or 12 times a year I'd be in the Rotunda. And I was sorry to hear that they were trying to demolish it, but thank goodness the planners didn't allow that, and it is a landmark for the city. Even the lift used to work. I'm glad I came here, and I'm delighted to have built this club, as I said earlier. I just regret really being 84 years of age, because I can't continue, but Birmingham has been very good to me, and I love the city, I love the people. Aston Villa's my love, my life, and it's my home, it's my second home.
Right, I'm Cash the Flash Gill, 4 times world kickboxing champion. Born in Handsworth, the inner city area, Obviously I love the city very, very much. Got a lot of memories of Rotunda. A lot of meetings there, kickboxing trips, football trips, we're always met there. Great landmark for Birmingham, obviously the Rotunda brings up all the community together. Being circular shape as well, obviously eternal, in blacks, whites, Asians, everyone mixes. Obviously we don't see colour. It's obviously a focal point for the centre of Birmingham. It stands out, it's great, turns its back on nobody. It unites everyone together and it brings everyone together. That's exactly what I'm trying to do here. It means a lot to me to have the Jimmy here in Birmingham. To get the kids obviously off the streets is excellent for the city.
Gladstone Small, ex-former past-it cricketer, playing for the Warwickshire Bears at Edgbaston, played there for 20 years in the city, and a place that I grew to love. The Gar Street Basin isn't quite like the Caribbean Sea, not yet anyway. Obviously my background is mainly in the sporting atmosphere, where playing cricket, my first love. I mean, here we are, we have what I used to use for work, a cricket ball, and back in the ages it would have been obviously still round, but it would be made of wouldn't be this glossy, and it would have been, it started off as rags and dyed red. And now the modern day, it's changed. Now this is a cricket ball dyed white. So that's been regenerated. Cricket's gone through a bit of a revolution and continue to do so. So everything's changed, but it's still a game of cricket in the end. It's still a game of cricket, and they still use a ball. And Birmingham has undergone a magnificent regeneration over the last sort of 10-15 years, how the landscape of the city has changed. Normally when these projects happen, they tear down the buildings to replace them with the modern stuff, but it's great that they've been able to use that iconic building in Rotunda, and yes, obviously change it, regenerate it, but it's still there. It's still going to be known as the Rotunda. The structure is in place, that round, cylinder of a building, and it's going to still be a wonderful centrepiece as the city moves on and on. So, long live the Rotunda and long live Birmingham.
My wife and I lived almost a quarter of a century in Birmingham from the early 1960s until 1987, and we liked it very much there. That everybody who lived in Birmingham that I knew used to start defending it rather defensively. You had to persuade your friends that you'd gone to live in Birmingham as a volunteer, because the public image of Birmingham, frankly, is not very good, or as good as it should be. And of course we arrived when the Birmingham City Fathers had gone through their usual habit of demolishing the city centre and building a new one, and it was the late 1950s city centre, which was still very new when we arrived, and which was dominated by the Rotunda. And I think it tilts. I gather the people who built it argue that, but I think it always tilted a little bit. It must have settled when it was put up, and I don't believe it's completely vertical. It's a bizarre building, really. It's not beautiful. It's a very odd piece of design, but it's very striking, and it does dominate the landscape in a way which I think is quite attractive. When the terrorists let off a bomb there and killed a lot of young people, it was a completely shocking outrage, but that was a kind of dramatic moment, horrible moment, which didn't fortunately demolish the landmark, just burnt it rather more deeply into people's minds. I actually liked the new Birmingham. It was very new. It made Birmingham look very modern, because all the buildings were fine, all those concrete buildings, while they were gleaming and before they became stained. And although it's all gone now, apart from the Rotunda, it wasn't actually as bad as the 1960s architecture that turned up in a lot of cities after it. When the time came for the City Council to decide yet again for the umpteenth time to flatten the centre and to rebuild it, I'm glad that they were persuaded to keep the Rotunda. I like the fact that Birmingham was a place that had come to terms with the motor car. That's very unfashionable now, but all those underpasses and things meant you could live in Moseley, which is where we lived, and use the city centre. Both our children were born there and went to school there, so they're Brummies, really. And we look back at it very fondly, and in a way it was a pity we had to leave. We only left because I hadn't got a job there anymore.
When we first moved to Birmingham in 1980, the Rotunda had a huge Coca-Cola sign up at the top of it, which Angela Rippon unveiled, I think, and also a clock. And we had a flat top floor of a Victorian house in Moseley, and to tell the time, I don't know why I did this, I'd go to the bedroom window, get the binoculars out and look to the city centre and tell the time from that. I don't know why I didn't just look at my watch, but it seemed quite exciting.
I'm Danny Bernardi, and I'm the author of a novel entitled Under the Rotunda. A contemporary novel. It's set in today's Birmingham. It's not a book about the Rotunda itself, but the Rotunda looks over the action and gives the whole plot a sense of place. The Rotunda is almost a silent character looking down upon the action unfolding beneath it. So I was very keen when I thought of the idea for the plot that I wanted to set it here, right here in the second city. And a lot of people were really sort of saying to me, well, if you want to stand any chance of this book succeeding, it's got to be set in London. I think most people from outside Birmingham haven't really got a clue what the Rotunda has come to mean to most people living in Birmingham or people who are from Birmingham. And certainly it's quite typical of Brummies to be fairly apathetic about the things around them, particularly the built environment, until the very moment somebody says, we're going to change this, we're going to knock it down. And it was at that point that Brummies, people interested in the built environment, people working and living in Birmingham, decided that that wasn't going to happen. So what does the Rotunda mean to me? Well, I've got to be quite honest with you and say that when I'm as old as the Rotunda is, I'm the same age as the Rotunda. When I was young, it symbolised everything I didn't like about Birmingham. It seemed to stand over a city that was in decline, that was stagnating, and really almost had a stranglehold over it. And it symbolised everything I didn't like at the time about Birmingham. But as I've got older and I've watched it turn from a much vilified building into a much loved building, I think my attitude towards it has very much changed now. And I see it as a symbol of stability and everything that's good about Birmingham. So what is it about this building that makes people remember it, that makes people have such strong reactions towards it? And I don't know the answer to that, but maybe it's a combination of a number of things. I suppose when it was built, it would have been one of the most dominant features on the skyline. You couldn't possibly ignore it. So from that point of view, people of my generation will have felt it was quite a stunning visual image. So maybe that's part of the reason. Its shape. I travel all over the country and I can't honestly think of another building that looks like it. And it is quite unique in terms of its design, its shape, and its visual impact. And thirdly, because it's such an iconic part of the city centre of Birmingham, of the metropolis, of course, everybody will have memories of it. So everybody is probably in some way connected to the Rotunda in the sense that they've got memories linked to it. I'm not going to pretend everybody loves the building, or that everybody in Birmingham feels strongly about the building, but everybody knows that building. And hopefully its latest reincarnation is going to make it an even more treasured possession of this city. So the irony of all this, all these years later, when I decided to put pen to paper and write a book set here in Birmingham, was that as well as the book being called Under the Rotunda, it was actually written under the Rotunda. I live not far from Spaghetti Junction, and on a clear day, you can see the Rotunda quite distinctly from my back garden. And at night, it's lit up like a candle. So all these years later, I've tried to escape from it, and it's drawn me back underneath it once more. Bobby turned his back towards the window. Maybe it wasn't the rotunda he could see. Maybe it was the telecom tower. Maybe it was his imagination. He'd started dreaming about the rotunda lately, dreaming he was on top of it, and looking down at the new Bullring development, watching the people scuttle eagerly towards Selfridges to spend their hard-earned cash. Yes, he would stay.
I'll never forget the first time we were asked to look at the rotunda by the developers. And I just had that feeling of excitement in my body.
It was about 4 years ago, 2003, when the Birmingham Alliance approached Urban Splash to look at the rotunda. I can't ever forget that feeling of excitement in my belly, the chance to do something fantastic, something really, really interesting with one of Birmingham's most iconic buildings. First of all, there was the opportunity. What an amazing building. Secondly, there was the actual building itself. A round building, developers just don't do those normally. And then there was the problems the building had, but we brought on board Glen House Architects, a local Digbeth practice, and they started coming up with some really fantastic and interesting ideas to breathe life into this fantastic new icon. We got really, really excited about the scheme, converting this old office building, 60s building, to new modern apartments. It gave us enough confidence to buy the building, and then we started off with our really, really exciting sales campaign. Who could resist their own Trivial Pursuit wedge in the Rotunda building in Birmingham? So it was October 2005, we had the building, we had the great design, now we've got to sell them. Urban Splash had never sold any apartments before in Birmingham, but we used our own unique brand of style and design and literally started marketing them. People were queuing outside 2 or 3 days before the event. So here we are, we nearly finished the building now, and it's starting to look like a really, really fantastic scheme. Interestingly, it's actually what James Roberts' original scheme should have looked like, a full cylinder, but a cylinder of glass, a really, really modern future for Birmingham. We're really excited about it, and hopefully it's as good as what people thought it would be.
I suppose the thing is that today we dislike the 1960s and 70s buildings, whereas we love the Victorian ones. Back in the 1960s and 70s, they thought Victorian was old-fashioned, grubby, and worth clearing away. And every generation has a different view of its architectural predecessors. It's just the personal taste of a generation. You just have to be careful that you can kind of see the longer term value of buildings, I suppose. The bullring itself, the shopping centre that it stood next to, was terrible, really. It was inefficient. Eventually it was neglected, but even when it was at its height, you couldn't get down to it. The escalators were broken. It had a grim look to it. At least the Rotunda kind of lifted itself up above that and was striking. Yeah, it's almost like, you know, what do you think of the Mona Lisa? You see it so often that you cease to have a kind of opinion about it. It's just part of the wallpaper. Sure, Leonardo wouldn't like me saying that. And the Rotunda to me has become that. It is Birmingham. It's almost like saying, what do you think of Birmingham? To ask me about the Rotunda.
Je travaille pour Urban Splash, qui est un développeur et un constructeur aussi. Nous sommes en train de reconstruire la Rotunda, un building de 44 ans dans le centre de Birmingham.
I was here for about a month, and the guy I was working with, the carpenter I was supposed to be learning off, got the sack. And so I told everyone I was head carpenter, all my friends and everything. And then I found out that there were about 30 carpenters all working in the basement that I hadn't met yet. So I was absolutely gutted. And my title was revoked.
Le building a survécu quelques attentats et beaucoup d'années très prospères, mais les dernières années ont été très tristes puisqu'il n'y avait pas d'habitants ou de travailleurs à l'intérieur du bâtiment, donc c'était très vide.
This is my first job outside school, so that makes me the youngest person on site.
Donc Urban Splash a décidé de redévelopper ce gros bâtiment de 21 étages. Nous sommes en train de faire les dernières finitions. Nous allons finir, je pense, au mois de février 2008.
I hate going down in that basement, it's horrible. They sent me down there to go and work in the substation the once, and I was down there on my own. It just freaks me out. I hate it. The once I had to hang a door down there, and I had to get Hendrik to come down with me because I was too scared to go on my own. Obviously, I made the excuse that I couldn't carry the door on my own, but it's scary down there. It's really creepy. You can feel people brushing past you and stuff. It's really not nice.
Vous êtes bienvenus pour voir les finitions et les appartements quand ils seront finis. Merci.
I'm a Ghanaian, I come from Ghana. I'm in charge of snagging. I check defects. I mean, finishes. You know, when something is completed, I check them and then get subcontractors to rectify them. That's what I do.
I'm proud that I've been able to contribute something to this building because it's something that, it's a bit of an icon and it's something that my kids and grandkids will see if I have any.
Because the Rotunda is about, I think, 21 story. See, so it's not like that in Ghana.
Rotunda, facts and figures. We have over 50 trade contractors working on the project. 12 consultants have been involved in the project. 3,000 tonnes of material have been removed from the site. 2,000 tonnes of plasterboard have been delivered and installed onto the project. 400,000 linear meters of 2x2.
I mean, we've completed such a huge task, of bringing these whole things together and making it good for people to live in. I think the happiest moment would overtake the sad moment because it's a great job. to finish of the rotunda.
2,000 sheets of ply have been installed. We have 2,500 doors and frames have also been installed.
I mean, everybody should dream of living on the rotunda.
$3,000 gallons of paint have been put onto the walls, and Frank, our hoist driver, has been to the moon and back 4 times. The Rotunda has been one of the most difficult projects I've ever done, purely because of logistics. Very, very complex, getting actually materials into site and materials out of the site. We've actually done all this by a small hole in the side of the wall on level 4. Without that old bank vault, this building wouldn't be possible. Over the last 2 years of refurbing the Rotunda and bringing it back to life, the family I've actually built up here, who I mean by family, is the guys I'm working with, and actually the building itself, I've become very attached to it. It feels like a second home. I'll be very sad to actually leave the building, and every time I go past it, I'll look up to it and say what a great time I've had, what a hard time I've had, but I've really enjoyed it.
My name's Glenn Howells. I'm a director at Glenn Howells Architects, and we're responsible for the design of the new Rotunda. It's a building that is on our doorstep, and as you can see, our office overlooks the building. So it was an interesting one to work on. I think we tend to look at projects as being either foreground or background buildings. So a lot of the projects we're working on are about putting the context back, which is really important for towns and cities. But the Rotunda has always been a foreground building. It's always been sort of a memorable piece of the city. What we've sought to do is to maintain the simple cylindrical form of the building. That was one of the reasons that the building was listed. And in fact, what we've tried to do is go back to some of Jim's original ideas about having taller pieces of glass and smaller spandrel panels. That's why we've gone to a lot of effort to make a difference between the spandrel panel's texture and the glazing above. What you get is this sort of very interesting contrast between the smooth glass and then the textured glass. In discussions with English Heritage, one of the concerns was that we were changing the proportion of the glazing and therefore moving away from the essence of the building. However, in discussion with Jim Roberts, he pulled out his early sketches of the building, which showed it very much, his early ideas were very much in tune with what we're doing to the building now. We were able to have a conversation with him, and that's a completely different situation than if you're working on a Victorian or on a medieval building. For me, the Rotunda was a skyscraper because I came from Stourbridge, came in shopping probably for twice a year, for Christmas and then somebody's birthday. And it was any building that sort of made you crane your neck and look up, because it was the tallest building for many years in the centre of Birmingham. And when you're about 13, it's science fiction, the building was. It was amazing. I think the building looks very simple, almost looks effortless, but what should not be underestimated is the amount of thought and hard work that's gone into getting it to look like that.
It's been 40 years since my great uncle worked on the Rotunda, and now I'm working on it myself. I started working on the Rotunda with Glenn Howells Architect, and it's quite nice to kind of have a family connection and something to talk about. It's become quite personal to me because it spans through my family's generations.
This is a very delicate and light building to start with, and we needed an approach which wasn't demolition in the traditional sense, but needed to be more thought about in terms of surgery. The original building, built in the 60s, was very, very lean, and we had to reinforce it with carbon fibre straps and other techniques. The kind of
quirks and deformations in the existing structure is not untypical of buildings at that time, although on the Rotunda it could be said that they were pretty extreme. You can imagine 3 Mike Tysons every square metre on a typical floor in the Rotunda. The middle of the floor would deflect around about 9mm. It may look thin, but it's pretty strong. Unless, of course, you have a party full of Mike Tysons. So we've left it in just as good a condition as when we started.
One of the structural challenges on the project has been to create these new openings in the central concrete core, and in doing so we've had to introduce carbon fibre strengthening. These are the carbon fibre straps bonded to the underside of the floor slabs. The central communal space is all about lighting, materials, colour and texture. The central core has become a circular communal space for the residents. Going in from the apartments into the common lobby spaces, again, this was a very unique shape, a unique form, and also space in that it was designed very much like a gallery. Being born and bred in Birmingham, I have very fond memories of the Rotunda from very early days. I remember being picked up by my parents from the city centre. It became a very famous meeting point, a drop-off point, being on the edge of the ring road. The Rotunda is a building that's aged and lived with Birmingham, with the people of Birmingham. Everyone has fond memories of when it was first built, and how it's changed and how its settings have changed over the years. My personal relationship with the building was my uncle worked at the bar at the base of the building for many years, and that's what makes it a living piece. And what we're doing here is giving the building a facelift as it's just turned 40. Knowing the building since childhood, this is an absolute unique opportunity for me, a once-in-a-lifetime project, and the passion and enthusiasm I have for it is unbelievable. And you know, it's like being a child and your dream come true. 40 years ago, the Rotunda was built on a hill as an iconic landmark for Birmingham, and this new redevelopment will reinstate its iconic status for the next 40 years and more. You've got a history with the building, and that's what makes the Rotunda. It's not an innovative new building, and it's not about building the highest or the biggest or the best. It's about the history the building's got with the city. And for me, you know, being a young architect, it's been a great experience, one that I'll never forget. And you know, I think the sort of experience I have will certainly last for the rest of my life.
I have to say, I think suppose you reach for the moon sometimes and you get a few stars, but I'm happy with the Rotunda anyway, and I think it's not a bad job.